Hey there, dear friends. Imagine waking up one morning and realizing that the love you thought would protect you, cherish you, even save you, is the very same force pushing you perilously close to the edge. Picture yourself fresh from your wedding day, basking in the rosy glow of all those promises, only to find that behind the sweet words and gentle kisses lurks something far darker. That's where our story begins. I'm Betty, though you can call me Grandma Betty if you like. I've walked this earth for 73 years now, and I've learned a thing or two about hearts, both the wonderful soaring kind and the shattered, bleeding kind. Today, I want to share with you a tale I've kept locked away for almost half a century. It's a story of love's highest heights and its most harrowing depths, of joy so bright it blinded me, and of a pain so fierce it nearly took my life and the life of my unborn child. But before we dive into the heart of it, let me invite you to join me in something special. Over the years, you've given me your kindness, your time, and your eagerness to listen. Now I'm hosting a $500 giveaway as a small thank you for sticking by my side. It's easy to enter. Just click that subscribe button, ring the notification bell, and leave a comment telling me a little nugget about yourself. Maybe the city where you were born, or where you live now, or how many children or grandchildren you have. Anything at all that you'd like to share. I can't wait to read your stories, just as I'll share mine with you today. Now, let's step back to 1968. Picture Portland, Oregon, a city straddling gentle rivers with old maple trees shading unpaved roads and gas lamps flickering to life after sunset. Electricity wasn't a universal convenience. Some homes still ran on kerosene lanterns, and a few neighborhoods listened for the hum of a generator at dusk. Sundays weren't for shopping malls or movie theaters, but for church picnics and square dances in the town square. This was the backdrop of my youth, a simpler time, yet one not immune to heartbreak. I was 16 then, bright-eyed and hopeful, with dreams bigger than the Willamette River was wide. My father, Gerald, was a fisherman by trade and a stickler for proper behavior. After my mother passed away, when I was just 8, he raised my 5 sisters and me alone. He balanced his grief with fierce devotion, ensuring we learned right from wrong, respect from rebellion. So when I told him I wanted to attend a Sunday afternoon square dance, he agreed on one condition: no boys unless they had a chaperone, and they must be introduced properly. That's how I met him, Frank. He worked at the lumber mill just outside town, tall and broad-shouldered from lifting timber, with teeth so white they looked painted. He asked me to dance, and my heart did a little jig of its own. "A pretty girl like you shouldn't be alone," he said, tipping his hat. I believed he meant only me. In hindsight, I see he meant every girl he spoke to. But love at 16 is a different kind of brave, and I was ready to believe in fairy tales. After a few months of parental supervision and my father's pointed warnings that boys got shadows behind those bright eyes, he'd muttered to my sisters, Frank asked for my hand in marriage. We could only afford a small ceremony at St. Sebastian's Church, followed by a backyard barbecue with home-brewed beer for the men and soda pop for us girls. My sisters baked a 3-tier cake, collapsing with laughter when the icing sagged under the July heat. It was perfect, because in those moments, I felt like the happiest woman in Oregon. The early weeks of our marriage were a dream. Frank left before dawn with his lunch pail in hand and returned home in the late afternoon, holding a wildflower or a ribbon he'd picked for me. Our house was a tiny 2-room rental near the mill with an outdoor bathroom that was little more than a wooden shack in a pit. But I thought I'd won the lottery because I was with the man I loved. Then came the surprise that turned my world upside down. 2 months after the wedding, my period never came. A trip to Mrs. Ruth, the town's respected midwife, confirmed there was life growing inside me. Imagine the joy of holding that knowledge close to your heart, the secret smile that lifts your whole face, because at last you're creating a legacy of love. That night, I prepared Frank's favorite dinner pot roast with potatoes and decorated the table with a single wildflower in a glass. When he walked in the door, tired from work, but smiling, I barely contained my excitement. "Frank," I said, voice trembling, "we're going to be parents." His response was so wholehearted that I believed every plan he made. We'd build a cradle together, I'd stay home with the baby, and he'd work twice as hard for our future. For a month or two, it was bliss. I felt my baby's first gentle kicks, like secret little waves against my belly. Afternoons found us strolling along the riverbank, dreaming up names. He insisted it would be a boy, a strong lad to help me one day. My elder sister Sarah and my father visited often, bringing tiny crocheted booties and handmade blankets, marveling at how round my belly had grown. But then the small delays arrived. Frank's late nights at the mill, the faint scent of unfamiliar perfume on his shirt, the sting of salt where he once held me close. I convinced myself he was under more work pressure, banking overtime to care for our growing family. A pregnant woman wants to believe in happy endings after all. By the 5th month, though the pattern was undeniable, he was slipping away from our home, our marriage, our future. Money that once stretched a little beyond the bills now barely covered rent and groceries. The warmth, the flowers, the ribbons, they evaporated like morning dew. I tried to speak up. "You're different," I said, tremulously one night when he crept through the door well past midnight. "Is something wrong?" But he brushed me aside. "It's just the baby, making you see shadows everywhere," he scoffed. I was burdened by fatigue, morning sickness, and growing anxiety. My hands and feet swelled. My blood pressure crept upward, and headaches throbbed like alarms in my skull. Mrs. Ruth examined me again in her humble cottage and said the word I dreaded, preeclampsia. She spoke calmly about salt restrictions and rest. But in my heart, panic took root. Frank shrugged it off. "Women get sick over nothing," he grumbled. Rumors swirled around town about Frank and another woman, Marlene, the new secretary at the mill. I quashed them, calling them idle gossip. But deep down, I felt the truth in the hushed whispers, and the way Frank's embrace felt colder each night. And then, the unthinkable happened. He vanished for an entire week. No messages, no cash, no explanation. My big belly grew heavy, not just with life, but with dread. Day after day, I trudged to the mill, only to be told he'd taken leave to tend to a sick relative. It was a lie so clumsy, I could taste its falsehood. My father gathered me back into my childhood bedroom, cared for me like a little girl, and whispered, "You're strong, my daughter. You'll get through this." He was right, but nothing could prepare me for the horror of that weekend. Because when Frank finally stumbled back through our door, drunk, red-eyed, reeking of cheap perfume, it wasn't apologies he offered. It was violence. He cornered me in our bedroom, pressed his weight against my swollen belly, and whispered that if the baby didn't live, no one would ever know. I raised my voice to cry out for help, and he cracked my skull with a single blow. Blood blurred my vision. Then darkness. When I came to, I was in Portland General Hospital, pale as a ghost and trembling with shock. The doors to my womb had been violently torn, the placenta detached, and my son, our son, was gone. The doctors spoke of hemorrhage and blood loss so severe I'd teetered at the edge of life itself. They called my survival a miracle. I called it a curse. That, my dear friends, is the hook to my story. A 16-year-old bride who gave everything, her heart, her trust, her unborn child, to a man she believed would save her, only to discover he nearly destroyed her instead. But this is not just a tale of tragedy. It's the first step on a much longer journey through fear, faith, forgiveness, and finally, hope. So if you've ever wondered how a broken woman finds her way back to the light, stay with me. In the next installment, I'll tell you about the family who refused to let me break, the strangers who became my faith, and the seed of purpose that sprouted from the barren soil of my grief. Until then, leave me a word about yourself. I want to know who you are, where you're from, and what keeps you moving forward each day. And remember, sometimes the love you think will save you is the love you must learn to survive. Stay strong, and I'll see you soon. Let's drift back together to the summer of 1968, when Portland, Oregon sat like a secret whispered among the pines and rivers of the Pacific Northwest. I want you to imagine, for a moment, stepping into my shoes, which were back then scuffed leather boots or sensible Oxfords, never high heels. Picture a town of just over 300,000 souls, where the Willamette River sliced through downtown, carrying rafts of timber logs and the dreams of young families like mine. There were no gleaming skyscrapers dominating the skyline, and the air hummed not with jets overhead, but with the distant whir of a single propeller plane or the gentle whoosh of a passing train. Back then, the day began early, around 5 a.m. You'd hear the rattle of a milkman's cart, the clinking of glass bottles delivered to your porch. Morning news crackled through our black and white RCA console television, and if you were lucky, you had electricity at all hours. In some of the older neighborhoods, especially the ones tracing the muddy banks of the Columbia Slough, families made do with ice boxes and kerosene lanterns when the power grid simply couldn't reach them. Compare that to our world today: high-speed internet smartphones that fit in your pocket, light bulbs switched on by a single command to an app. It's a leap. Venus to Earth, isn't it? Sundays proved even more distinct. Forget the idea of a chain pizza restaurant or a multiplex cinema. Our Sundays revolved around church, a plain white wooden church, like St. Sebastian's, with narrow pews stained dark by half a century of knees, kneeling in prayer, and community potlucks spread out under oaks in the town square. My own father, Gerald, would haul his fishing gear back to the porch so as not to stink up the pews, and my sisters and I would sit in a row, elbows touching fingers, crossed in our best dresses my mother had sewn years before she passed away. On those Sundays, after the organ closed, with amazing grace, the whole congregation would spill onto the grass. Church ladies passed around Tupperware containers, fried chicken, Jell-O salad, fresh peaches in syrup. Children chased each other in socks, kicking up dust. The men swapped stories about the salmon runs on the Columbia or the latest news of new logging contracts with mills in California. The closest thing we had to a coffee shop was Mrs. Johnson's Diner on 7th Avenue. Her grease lamp bulbs and red vinyl booths you could get a hamburger for 25 cents and a slice of pie for a dime. My very first taste of a malted milkshake came from her old chrome and leather counter, topped with a cherry, and the soundtrack of airplanes looping overhead. Now, flash forward to today. A reader in Chicago or Miami or Los Angeles might laugh to hear about life without 24-hour Whole Foods or Uber Eats. You've got grocery delivery apps that know your favorite cereal, and you pay monthly to stream every movie ever made. Children's laughter in a modern suburban neighborhood might echo from a backyard splash pad, while half a dozen Wi-Fi-enabled devices squawk in unison as everyone grabs their morning screen time before rushing to work or school. Power outages happen, sure, but usually only when a storm drops a tree on a line, not because the grid didn't stretch far enough. The contrast can be jarring, but it's also a gift. Looking back, I see how different circumstances shaped our relationships, our hopes, and our fears. For us, home was more than a collection of walls. It was a patchwork of chores: fetching water if the well pump stalled, stoking the wood stove in winter, patching over frost cracks in the foundation. We didn't lock our doors in town. Kids slipped in and out like breeze, safe and free. Neighbors checked on each other by wandering around with a jug of preserves or a wire basket of eggs. No one hesitated to drop in if they smelled something burning in your oven or heard raised voices from next door. Now that you have a vivid sense of Portland's world of lantern-lit streets and porch swing Sundays, let's talk about how young love unfolded in that era, and the subtle warnings I wish I'd heeded back then. In Part 3, I want to explore the old-fashioned rules that governed romance in 1968, the way those rules sometimes hid red flags in plain sight, and how we can recognize similar patterns today so that we can love wisely, not just passionately. The courtship code of 1968 in my day dating was nothing like swiping right on a screen or sending flirty emojis at midnight. It was a highly choreographed dance of propriety and permission, parental consent above all. Before anyone could invite me out, Frank had to ask my father for permission, face to face, in my living room with my mother's wedding photo glinting from the mantel. My father would size him up, squinting for signs of character in his handshake and posture. Does he respect a young lady's honor? Was unspoken, but understood. Chaperoned outings. The living room door stayed wide open. We sat far apart on the sofa, heads bowed, voices low, while my sisters hovered nearby, ready to shush or swoop in at the first hint of impropriety. Church festivals and square dances. Our dates were public by necessity. Square dances with live fiddle music, church fairs under the elms, or simple carriage rides along the riverbank where other families could spot us. Reporting back every late night warranted an explanation the next morning at breakfast. A note tucked under my father's coffee cup or a sheepish apology at the dinner table kept trust mostly intact. These codes felt restrictive sometimes, but they also provided an illusion of safety. Like a lifeguard station on the beach, you believed that as long as you followed the rules, you could avoid danger. Yet the very structure meant to protect you could also blind you to warning signs. At 16, I had a head full of romance novels and a heart impatient for its first great love story. When Frank asked me to dance at the church picnic, I saw a knight in work-worn boots. What I failed to notice were the little shadows lurking behind his smile. The love-bombing glow every girl in town seemed to receive Frank's practiced compliments. He told me I was special, but looking back, I realize he told that line to every debutante in a poodle skirt. His words felt warm and genuine, just as love bombs do, but they glossed over the emptiness beneath. Boundary testing. On our third date, he insisted on walking me home. He lingered on my doorstep long after the lantern beside the door flickered off. It felt flattering until he tried to hold my hand a moment too long. I laughed it off, telling myself he was just romantic. In truth, that was his first test of boundaries. Inconsistent availability. One way a week, he would show up early with a blossom in hand. The next, he'd cancel last minute with a vague excuse about extra shifts. Inconsistent attention is often a sign that someone prioritizes control over connection, a signal that he was checking to see how far he could push my trust. Dismissal of concerns. When I mentioned once that his compliments felt a bit rehearsed, he chuckled. "You're too suspicious," he said. "That's just me being a gentleman." By brushing off my doubts as paranoia, he planted the idea that I was the problem, not his behavior. Flash forward to the present, and the game has changed, but many of the same danger signs remain. If you're navigating Tinder or Bumble, look out for these equivalents: constant flattery without depth. A flood of compliments can feel intoxicating, but ask yourself, does this person know something real about you? Compliments on looks are fine until they eclipse any interest in your mind or character. Inconsistent communication. Someone who texts you at 2 a.m. and then vanishes for days is testing your attachment. If they claim to be busy, notice whether that busyness comes without explanation or genuine apology. Boundary pushing. In private, adorable. At first, come on one hug, then suddenly threatening sulking or guilt-tripping you when you politely say no. That's not romance. It's coercion, cloaked as courtship. Gaslighting or dismissal. When you voice concerns about his or her behavior, does your partner label you too sensitive or overreacting? That tactic undermines your confidence and shifts blame to you. I was raised to believe that love justified sacrifice. My father's strict moral code stressed forgiveness. My sisters touted the virtue of patience. Those same voices that urged loyalty also taught me not to rock the boat. In that dynamic, silence felt safer than conflict. Confrontation meant shaming the family's reputation. I rationed my worries into small, late-night journals rather than speaking up. Romance clouded judgment. Like many young hearts, I believed love meant tolerating discomfort. If he truly loved me, I told myself he'd change. That hope kept me quiet, even as my gut prickled. Limited options for escape. In a time before credit cards were common, women had fewer financial or social avenues to leave a bad relationship. Marriage at 16 felt like the only choice, one rarely reversed without significant stigma. By the time genuine alarm bells rang, when my skirt was yanked too roughly, when kisses turned into forceful grabs, it was almost too late. The same man who once carried me home with a sunflower on my pillow ended up crushing life itself in my womb. In retrospect, I see that those early red flags, subtle boundary tests, inconsistent warmth, and quick dismissals were the prologue to the tragedy I barely survived. So how can we honor those lessons from the past while forging healthier connections now? Here are practical steps. Trust your gut. Instincts, that prickly feeling when someone's behavior seems off. Pay attention. Our intuition processes subtle cues our conscious mind might overlook. Set and enforce clear boundaries. Define what feels safe and comfortable, and don't negotiate on those lines. If your date can't respect a simple no, they're not the one for you. Look for consistent actions, not just sweet words. Real care shows up in reliable gestures, checking in when you said you had a rough day, showing up on time, and remembering details that matter. Seek outside perspectives. Discuss your relationship with trusted friends or family members. They can often see warning signs that you've become too close, too invested to notice. Educate yourself on healthy relationship norms. Read resources from organizations like the National Domestic Violence Hotline or loveisrespect.org. Understanding what constitutes emotional or physical abuse arms you against it. Value your independence. Cultivate your own interests, finances, and social network. A partner who appreciates your autonomy will be happy to see you thrive, for you to have a full life alongside them. I wish I could tell you that I recognized every red flag confronted them and wrote my own fairy tale ending. But grief and guilt and societal pressure kept me silent. What I hope as I share this with you today is that you can spot those early warning signs in your own love story and choose safety, respect, and mutual care over silence and sacrifice. Because true love is not a surrender, it's a partnership. It's about two people choosing to protect each other's hearts, not test their limits. It's about consistent kindness, clear communication, and the freedom to grow without fear. As our journey through these chapters continues, next, we'll dive into how my pregnancy unfolded. The joyous anticipation, the first tender kicks, and the moment when the promise of new life met the nightmare I couldn't yet fathom. Until then, take a moment to reflect on your own story. Have you seen these red flags in someone you loved? And if so, what kept you from speaking up? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Stay safe, stay kind to yourself, and remember, your worth is never in question, and true love will never ask you to compromise your peace. I'll see you in part 4. I still remember that afternoon in late August, when with trembling hands, I traced the faint 2 pink lines on the pregnancy test. A hush fell over me, as if the world had paused just long enough for that quiet miracle to register. A life had begun coasting gently beneath my ribs. I walked into the kitchen, where Frank was wiping grease off his work boots after a long day at the mill. Holding up the test like a flag of hope, I whispered, "We're going to have a baby." His eyes softened, crinkled with the sort of tenderness I thought only came in stories, and he scooped me into his arms. I felt my heart beat in my throat. For the next few weeks, our little 2-room house near the lumber mill felt like both a cradle and a spaceship. An entire universe contracted into the stretch of my swelling belly. Morning sickness arrived on soft, unruly feet, a queasy companion that hovered at dawn and lingered until mid-morning. I'd lie in bed until the sun slid through the curtains, then tiptoe out and nibble a saltine or sip weak ginger tea, just enough to keep my stomach from staging a full rebellion. Back then, prenatal vitamins were less commonplace than they are now. Most of us leaned on the midwife's advice: fresh fruit when in season, and rest whenever we could muster it. Contrast that with today's prenatal care: streamlined obstetric appointments, ultrasound scans that let you peek at tiny arms and legs, kicking on a black and white screen, and hospital-grade lab tests to check iron levels, blood sugar, and everything in between. Women now have apps that track fetal growth by the week, reminding you when to schedule that glucose tolerance test, or when the baby's movement should feel like gentle flutters versus full-on somersaults. We had none of that luxury. Instead, we trusted Mrs. Ruth's practiced hands and her soft-spoken confidence. "Your baby is fine," she'd say, running her palm along my rounded belly. "Just rest, my dear. We'll see you next month." And rest, we did, or tried to. Frank took to leaving earlier, his lunch bucket swinging from his fingers like a battle standard proof that he was working harder than ever for us. He'd return home at day's end with stories of lumber shipments bound for Southern California, always emphasizing the extra hours he'd punched in. Sometimes he'd hover at the doorway, catching the last slant of light on my belly, tracing patterns on my shirt with a fingertip. "He's getting stronger every day," he murmured once, grinning. "I can't wait to hold him." I believed him then, without reservation, imagining a chubby-handed boy, with my eyes and Frank's broad features, running barefoot across the backyard. Week by week, as my body reshaped itself, I learned its new rhythms. The first unmistakable flutter, a gentle tap-tap, like a message in Morse code, arrived in the 4th month. I pressed my palm to my belly, marveling at the spark of life. "He's saying hello," I told my sister Sarah when she visited. We sat on the edge of the bed, me in my cotton nightgown, and she in her favorite denim overalls, marveling together. Sarah would tie a ribbon around my waist. Blue, obviously, because Frank insisted, and we'd laugh at how ridiculous I looked, so round in such a tiny dress. Those moments felt like pure magic. In those early months, my world became a patchwork of small celebrations. I clipped out articles from the paper, best foods to eat during morning sickness, how to prepare your home for baby though. We had no magazines like Parents or Today's Parent in our tiny town. I saved peach pits and tiny pine cones from family outings, stashing them on the windowsill for a future nursery decoration. Every person who crossed our doorstep left a token, a 1/4 pound of butter from Mrs. Jenkins next door, homemade sugar cookies from my aunt, a soft knitted cap from my mother-in-law, an act of love woven into every stitch. But amid the joy, doubt quietly tightened its grip. Sometimes I'd lie awake at night, staring at the moonlight pooling on the bedroom floor, wondering if I was ready for the responsibility of motherhood. Would I remember to feed him on time, change him without dropping him? Would I know what to do when he cried? At 2 a.m, ladies at church fairs passed around, hushed advice. Don't scare him into bottle refusing or switch at bedtime, so he learns your scent. The fear of messing up stretched me thin, yet I found comfort in Frank's calm assurance. He'd brush a stray hair from my forehead and whisper, "You'll be the best mama." By the 5th month, I'd traded in my old dresses for hand-me-down maternity skirts, the waistbands stretched by elastic my mother had skillfully sewn in. My body felt foreign and familiar all at once, like traveling in someone else's suit, but one that I'd grown into with every passing week. I kept a simple journal of my experiences. The first day I felt him hiccup, like a gentle twitch. The time I craved pickles and bacon at midnight. The afternoon I wept, reading a letter from my childhood friend, who sent her congratulations with a get-well card reminder that baby feet make the best footprints on your heart. One Sunday at church, Father Michael handed me the bulletin and gently asked how I was doing. He didn't offer hollow platitudes, no God works in mysterious ways, or everything happens for a reason. Instead, he said, "Every life is a blessing, and these are sacred times." His words were like balm, reminding me that my fears were part of something larger than my own anxieties. He invited me to join the women's group for expectant mothers, a small circle of 5 ladies who met each Thursday evening in the parish hall, sharing stories and ginger ale, comparing stretch mark lotions and nursery color schemes. In that circle, I learned that my worries weren't unique, that mothers across town wrestled with the same doubts, and that community could be a cradle stronger than any blanket. Of course, not every day felt rosy. One afternoon, I returned from the mill to find Frank silent in his chair, shadows under his eyes. I had prepared his favorite pot roast with potatoes, filled the kettle for tea, placed a single wildflower in a glass on the table, as I had so many times before. But he barely touched the food, tracing the rim of his cup with his finger. "Tough day," he muttered, voice flat. I sat beside him and draped an arm over his shoulders. "Do you want to talk?" I asked softly. He silenced me with a shake of his head and stood clutching his hat. "Just needed to clear my head," he said, disappearing out the door before I could respond. I tried not to worry, telling myself it was normal work stress, that lumber contracts and shipping delays weighed heavily on him. But as the days slipped by, those silent dinners became more frequent, and his late-night returns edged beyond excuse. Each time I reached out, it was dismissed. "You're seeing things that aren't there. It's just nerves. Pregnancy makes you anxious." As modern mothers know, mental health during pregnancy is as critical as physical health. Toxoplasmosis, gestational diabetes, and even prenatal depression are common concerns now. Doctors encourage open dialogue at every appointment, screening tools are in place, and hotlines exist specifically for perinatal mood disorders. Back then, stigma ruled the day. To admit fear was to admit weakness. I tucked my doubts beneath layers of hope and satin ribbons. My sister Sarah noticed the change in me, how I flinched at unexpected noises, how I sometimes sobbed alone in the pantry when a sudden wave of sadness crashed over me. One evening, she gently chided me. "You're carrying more than just a baby, Bets. You're carrying all your hopes and all your fears." She held my face between her hands and looked into my eyes. "Promise me you'll speak up if something's wrong." I nodded, but the seed of dread had already been planted. The dates of midwife visits loomed like appointments with fate. Each month, I braced myself, hoping for reassurance, but bracing for something darker. I stocked the pantry with easy meals, filled a small suitcase with baby outfits, and even printed out snippets of advice for Frank Calm. Words help a tired mama ask what I need, rest or company. I hoped these little notes would remind him that this was our journey together. On a crisp October afternoon, just as the leaves in Portland began turning amber and rust, I felt the first unmistakable tightening in my belly. It was gentle at first, mere minutes apart, like the flutter of wings, then grew bolder, incisive. "Sarah," I called out, voice trembling, "the baby. I think he's ready." She spooned cinnamon tea into a thermos and called Mrs. Ruth. In the hush of our tiny living room, with the Willamette song drifting in from the open window, I realized that this pregnancy, the joy, the trials, the unspoken worries, had brought me into a new realm of life, a realm where hope and fear danced together in every heartbeat. When Mrs. Ruth arrived, she touched my hand and said, "Betty, you've done well." And in that moment, I believed her. For every pang of nausea, every midnight craving, every downcast glance from Frank, there had been countless moments of wonder. The soft thump of a tiny foot, Frank's gentle smile at bedtime, Sarah's unwavering support, Father Michael's blessing, and the ripple of the river outside, carrying all our secrets to places unseen. I didn't know then that the sweetest promises can sometimes crack under pressure, that the same love that made my heart soar could shadow into something dark. But in those hours, leading to labor, cradled by the scent of fresh linen and my own anticipation, I tasted a perfection so fragile it hurt, like holding a soap bubble between your fingers, fearing at any moment it might burst. And when it did, well, that's a story for our next chapter. But for now, carry with you this truth. The journey of pregnancy is more than physical change. It's a crucible of hope, fear, and transformation. It tests us, teaches us, and if we're brave enough to open ourselves, shows us just how profoundly we can love. It was during the long October night, when the scent of wood smoke drifted in through our open bedroom window, that the nightmare began. I'd spent the evening breathing through each contraction, rocking gently, in the old rocking chair my father had built for me, feeling the baby's head dip lower and the pain build and recede like relentless ocean waves. Sarah was at my side, holding my hand and whispering encouragement. Mrs. Ruth had paused her knitting and dozed in a corner chair, confident that with her guidance and my body's natural rhythm, I would welcome my son in the soft light of dawn. Then the front door banged open. A cold gust of wind stirred the lace curtains. Frank stumbled in, reeking of whiskey and a faint trace of unfamiliar perfume. His eyes were dark and wild. He slurred something I couldn't fully grasp. At first, I thought he'd changed his mind about leaving me alone during labor, but the set of his jaw told me otherwise. "Where have you been?" I asked as kindly as I could. The contraction that followed nearly doubled me over in pain. He leaned against the doorframe, one hand on his hip, the other still gripping his coat. "I've been working," he snapped. "Don't give me that look." Sarah rose protectively. "Betty's in labor, Frank," she said. "You're supposed to." He cut her off with a guttural laugh. "Labor." He pointed at my belly as if it were a frivolous balloon. "This baby of yours is gonna be trouble." I managed to whisper, "I need you here. I'm scared." He stepped forward, his face inches from mine. He smelled of stale beer and something sweet perfume, or lipstick, I couldn't tell. "Scared, you should be. You and that brat inside you both should be scared." The words fell like stones in my chest. My fear turned cold and deep. I tried to move away, but a contraction hit so hard, I clenched the chair's armrest with one hand and gasped through gritted teeth. Sarah dashed over, steadying me. Without warning, Frank grabbed my shoulders and shoved me back into the chair. The force slammed me against the wood, and I cried out. Mrs. Ruth stirred her shawl, slipping off her shoulders. Frank Sarah shrieked. "Let her go!" He ignored her, his face twisted with a rage I'd never seen before. He knelt at my side, pressed one hand over my mouth so I couldn't scream. With his other hand, he put all his weight on my abdomen. I felt a sharp, crushing pain, like someone had twisted a knife inside me. My vision swam, and I thought I heard the baby's faint cry, though I knew that was impossible. "Stop!" I managed to mumble between sobs. "You're killing him!" He leaned closer, his breath hot and ragged. "If this baby dies," he whispered, "no one'll ever know." It wasn't just complications. In that moment, time fractured. I knew two things: that I was in terrible danger, and that my child was in even worse danger. I summoned every ounce of strength I had left, bit down on his hand until it tasted of iron. He snarled, slapped me hard across the cheek, and I slumped back, head spinning. The midwife's chair scraped as she lunged toward us, shawl slipping from her shoulders. "Frank," she cried, but her voice shook like a leaf. He swung at her too, an ugly arc of fury, and she ducked behind Sarah as I slipped into darkness. When I came to, the world was all white walls, in the persistent beep of a hospital monitor. Pain radiated from my abdomen, searing and unrelenting. My throat felt dry and hoarse. I croaked when I tried to speak. A kind-faced nurse hovered at my bedside, pressing a cool cloth to my forehead. "Easy now," she said softly. "The doctor's on his way." Pieces of memory bobbed in and out. Frank's anger, the crushing force, the blood, Sarah's screams, Mrs. Ruth's frantic prayers, the wagon ride to the hospital. I remembered reaching the emergency room on a cold gurney, the bright lights overhead, a chorus of urgent voices. Finally, a young doctor, with tired eyes and a gentle manner, came in, clipboard in hand. He introduced himself as Dr. Reynolds. He spoke quietly, like sharing a secret. "Mrs. Betty, you suffered a severe placental abruption," he said. "That's when the placenta detaches from the uterine wall before delivery. It's life-threatening for you and the baby." My world tilted. I try to grasp the word abruption. He continued, "Your blood pressure was nearly undetectable when you arrived. We lost a lot of blood. We performed an emergency transfusion to stabilize you. I'm so sorry your son didn't survive." The words hit harder than any slap. I wanted to push away from the bed, chase after him, beg him to say it wasn't true. Instead, I felt hollowed out, as though someone had scooped the center from my chest. The doctor's face blurred through tears that seemed to pour from nowhere. "Is he gone?" I whispered. He nodded, eyes downcast. "He was a boy. We tried everything." In that moment, grief and rage tangled inside me. I thought of the life I imagined, diaper changes at midnight, his little foot tapping on my chest to wake me, his laughter echoing in the hallway. It all vanished like smoke. Beneath the sorrow, a furnace of anger burned, bright anger at Frank, at the violence he inflicted, at the betrayal of the man I thought I loved. Later, when I was coherent enough to face questions, the police arrived to take my statement. My father sat in the waiting room, pipe clenched between his teeth, shoulders trembling with silent fury. He'd been summoned from home by Sarah, who'd sent the boy next door running for help when Frank disappeared after the attack. They asked me to describe what happened. At first, I hesitated. Did I dare accuse my own husband? But the truth had clawed its way out of my mouth. I explained about the force he used, the threats, the blow to my head that left me unconscious. They took notes, arranged for a restraining order, and promised to search for him. Frank was nowhere to be found. He'd left behind his coat hat, even his lunch bucket, like smoke, evaporating at sunrise. Rumors soon spread that he had fled to Seattle, then perhaps further east. No one knew for sure. Meanwhile, my recovery was both physical and emotional. The doctors monitored me for weeks, making sure my blood volume returned to normal and that no complications remained. I lay in the hospital bed, IV lines in my arms, fresh bruises marking my belly and arms. Nurses bathed me, fed me broth, and changed my dressings. Mrs. Ruth visited, her eyes full of tears, her hands praying over my bowed head. Sarah stayed by my side day and night, shifting in the chair until her back ached. It was during those long days that I learned the true scope of domestic violence during pregnancy. The next morning's newspaper had a small quote from Dr. Reynolds' physical abuse during pregnancy is an all too common cause of placental abruption in preterm labor. I read that domestic violence affects 1 in 4 women in the U.S., and intimate partner violence can spike during pregnancy, putting both mother and child at extreme risk. CDC Study 2015-2018. I saw statistics I'd never sought before: how nearly 20% of pregnancy-associated deaths involved homicide, often by a partner. How emotional abuse threats and coercive control can escalate into physical violence. The words burned on the page. No one deserves violence. Help is available. I vowed then that I would not be silent. For every woman who feared speaking up, for every child who never got a chance to draw their first breath. When I was finally well enough to leave the hospital, I was escorted by a social worker who gave me a pamphlet printed with phone numbers, the National Domestic Violence Hotline RAIN, and local shelters and support services. She said, "You're not alone. We can help you stay safe." Leaving that hospital, I felt fragile as a bird whose wings had been clipped. Yet I carried with me something fierce and steady, a resolve born of suffering and love. I knew my body was healing, but my heart needed more than ointments and rest. It needed justice, community, and the courage to rebuild. I moved back into my childhood home under my father's watchful care. He patched the porch steps, brought in wood for the stove, and smoked his pipe until the evening haze rolled in. My sisters fussed over me, reminding me to eat, reminding me to breathe. And I clung to the hotline numbers like lifelines, knowing that if fear ever visited again, I had more than prayers. I had a path to safety. In the following weeks, I learned more about how pregnancy-related violence is a hidden epidemic, how fear and stigma keep victims from reaching out. I discovered that many communities offer support groups where women can share their stories, where trained advocates help create safety plans and access safe housing. I learned that in the U.S., laws such as the Violence Against Women Act provide resources and funding for shelters and legal aid, and that each state has its own protective order process to keep abusers away. My own judge granted me a restraining order against Frank, a piece of paper that felt both powerful and insufficient. I knew that justice in the courtroom was only one step. Healing in my heart would take longer. But I held on to that order like a shield, a reminder that laws exist to protect the most vulnerable among us. And so I began to piece together a new life, one where I could find strength in community, in sharing my story, and in helping others avoid the darkness I'd endured. But first, I needed rest, reflection, and the knowledge that even in the cruelest night, the dawn would eventually come. In our next chapter, dear friends, I will tell you how faith and family guided me from the depths of despair to the first flickers of hope, and how, in the quiet hours, I discovered that purpose can grow from pain. Until then, remember, you are not alone. Help is just a phone call away. You deserve safety, and you deserve peace. I'll see you soon.